who wants to be seated? Okay. Then let's go ahead and get started. Can someone hit the lights in the back? Dim them a little bit. All right. Welcome to a forum as presented by the State Libertarian Executive Committee. We are very excited to have you all tonight. And tonight our focus will be on building effective... Was that me? I didn't... Okay. All right. My apologies. I'm sure that hurt everybody's ears quite a bit. Tonight's focus is on building effective organizations to lobby for whatever cause or causes it is that you care about most. We're very happy to be able to present an excellent panel, and I will introduce all of them to you right now. First, we have Cheyanne Weldon with NORML. She previously served as TXNORML Secretary for 3 years and is now Director of Women's Outreach. In 2012, she was honored as High Times Freedom Fighter of the Month, so that's wonderful. Then we have Greg Foster, who is the Vice President of EFF Austin, an independent nonprofit civil liberties organization staffed by experts who comprehend the complexities that arise at the intersections of science, society, and technologies. Wait, that's Greg at the very end. I'm very sorry. This is not in order. Matt Simpson. Undergraduate degree in political science and a JD from Lewis and Clark Law School. He is now a policy strategist at the ACLU of Texas. And that is what he is doing for us tonight. Next, we have Jeanette Moll. Nods that I know I got that one right. Yes, thank you. Juvenile Justice Policy Analyst in the Center for Effective Justice at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Prior to joining TPPF, she served as a legislative aide in the Wisconsin Legislature, where she dealt with various policy issues, media affairs, and constituent outreach. Next, we have Michael Cargill, who is an Army vet, served for 12 years, and he's co-owner of the Central Texas Gunworks, Austin-based store which sells firearms and offers a variety of firearms training, including CHL courses, and does a lot of Second Amendment activism. Next, we have Terri Hall, founder of San Antonio Toll Party and Texans Uniting for Reform and Freedom. She's also a homeschool mom of 8 and takes taxpayer advocacy very seriously. She's done some wonderful things. And that at the end is Greg Foster, who I introduced earlier. So thank you guys very much for being here. We have, what we're doing tonight is that, okay, there we go. We are trying to learn how to build better organizations to reach out for the causes we care about. Right now I'd like to tell you about some of the county organizations that we have going. We have 50 organized, no, how many organized counties do we have? 51 in Texas, including Williamson County and Travis County. And I mention that specifically because I imagine many audience members are from those two areas. So if you would like to participate in those two counties, you're more than welcome. The Williamson County has their chair and vice chair here, if you all could raise your hand. That's Bo Zimmerman and Robert Butler. And they have meetups every month. Their business meeting is the second Tuesday, and you can find them on meetup.com. So please stop by and find out what they're doing. I am the chair in Travis County, and we also have, yay Travis. We also have meetings once a month, and we're working on having socials every month. And we tend to use our Facebook page more. So if you could find us there, that would be most appreciated. All right. So,
It's under her too.
sorry? Okay. So as I said, we're here tonight to learn more about building strong organizations, citizen coalitions, activist groups to get more done. And we invited you all because you're experts in doing that. So let me tell you about the format tonight with that overall goal in mind. First, I'm going to ask you to each spend a minute describing your organization's goals. Then, I'd like to ask you to describe a year-round picture of the channels you work through to achieve those goals. Then after that, I'd like you to describe specifically what you're doing in the legislative cycle. And then finally, I'd like you to ask what is the most effective thing that one individual can do? Just what really helps the most, has the greatest power. After that, we'll open up to audience participation. So unless there are any questions or caveats from the panel, I think we'll begin with Cheyanne down here. If we could just get a minute from each of you about the goals of your organization, and next time we'll talk about how you achieve them. So right now, just the goals, please.
Okay, is that better? Okay, I knew I shouldn't have sat at the beginning of the table. I actually moved my car to sit here, so sorry. So the goal of NORML as a national group, which we are with over 100 chapters nationwide, TXNORML is the chapter in Austin, but the national message is that we're trying to move public opinion sufficiently so that the adult responsible use of cannabis is no longer a crime. That's the basic core message in whatever way we can do that. And for those of you who don't know, NORML is the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, established in 1970 when we thought it would be legal very soon, and we're still trying, so.
Well, I am from the state affiliate of the ACLU, so all of our goals tend to be either local or statewide in nature. And they fall into 4 categories. We work on immigrants' rights, we work on school-to-prison pipeline issues, we work on trying to end over-incarceration, try to address issues like the death penalty, the use of solitary confinement, and then finally we work on religious freedom, to try to make sure that the public forum is a place where everybody, and of any religion or no religion, has kind of an equal chance. In terms of the specifics, I think the most interesting of the campaigns for this group is probably our work with school to prison and with criminal justice, which will actually overlap probably kind of more than you would expect with TPPF. So I'll try to keep it brief, but we're particularly interested in trying to end ticketing in public schools. Texas has a major problem with over-ticketing students in class. Or in the halls. We're looking at some accountability measures for law enforcement that are placed in schools. Most schools now have law enforcement stationed there full-time, but there is no specialized training, and there is no data on arrests and citations from schools. So we're working on those issues with the Ledge this session, with TPPF, with Texas Appleseed, and a pretty nice spectrum of groups. And then when it comes to criminal justice, we're particularly focused on over-criminalization, which certainly touches on some of the drug law reform, as well as looking at the death penalty if possible, which is a little tricky at the Ledge, and solitary confinement, as I mentioned. So those are kind of some of the things I'll probably talk about in the context of our work to come.
Thank you.
So my foundation is a nonpartisan, nonprofit think tank devoted to free markets and individual liberty. And so we seek to effectuate those goals in a wide variety of policy areas. We were actually founded back in the 80s to focus on school choice. And we've now expanded to cover, I think we have 8 different policy centers now, from healthcare to education, higher ed, and why I'm here, criminal justice, juvenile justice, and over-criminalization. And so in those fields specifically, we work to make sure the government is as small as possible, because there has to be a role for government in criminal justice. But we also need to make sure that it's small and that it's effective. And so we work to make sure that they're not wasting taxpayer dollars, that they're not unfairly infringing upon the rights of citizens to perform their duties or to work in the free market. There's a lot of different things that we're working on this session, but a lot of them, as Matt mentioned, focus on criminal justice, school discipline reform, over-criminalization. We have thousands of felonies and misdemeanors on the books right now in Texas, and we need to make sure that we're only making public safety issues a criminal law issue. So So we'll go into more specifics later.
Goal. I don't know. There's so many of them. Where do we begin? My goal is to get constitutional carry in the state of Texas. That's my goal. Constitutional carry. My goal, what is my goal? My goal is to tell the government to stay out of my home, stay out of my bedroom, and keep your hands off my guns. That's my goal. So many goals. I don't know. My goal this year is to have open carry passed in the state of Texas. That is my goal. Yeah. My goal is to have concealed carry on campus passed this year. That is my goal. My goal is to have everyone that I possibly can to support all pro-gun legislation in the state of Texas. I want to get you to show up. That's my goal. I need you to join me. I don't want to be alone. That's right. That's my goal.
Absolutely, I'll piggyback on that. We can't do this alone. That's why you are also integral to what we do. But TERV, our primary mission is defending property rights and the freedom to travel. So it's transportation-related issues. And as you can imagine, as you've been you're getting hit with an onslaught of toll roads, in particular in Austin. The way they're being done, I think you'd find very offensive as libertarians. It really is one of the biggest impediments to our freedom to travel in our modern age. Two of the things in particular that would be of interest to your group that we're working on this legislative session is the way that they're criminalizing driving. There's a lot of areas now where you just literally can't even drive in your car. We were the only group, by the way, to testify against the ban on texting in your vehicle. If you actually read that bill, that means that if you're even holding your phone in your car, a cop can give you a $100 ticket. If you're even touching your phone. And it's only a defense of prosecution if you can prove you're guilty until proven innocent. You have to go into court and prove that you were only dialing your phone or programming your GPS. But otherwise, they will assume that you're guilty, and how many people are going to take a day off work and go pay to park downtown, and all of this to defend a $100 bill. Of course, some of you will, but most people won't, and they're counting on that. And so it's really a revenue generation scheme, which we said in committee. Then another thing is how they're going to criminalize us for failure to pay tolls. Ultimately, you can be thrown in jail for failing to pay tolls. It's like a debtor's prison, which is against the Constitution, both federal and state. So this is a huge problem, and it's going to continue to be a problem until we rein it in. And we would love the help of the activists in this room to help us do that, because we do need to have help. We can't be the only lone wolves in committee, and they see me at every transportation committee hearing. So it helps to have other faces. So especially when you live in Austin, if you can make it at all to the legislature for committee hearings, it's going to be a key time for us here during the session. So we'll tell you how you can do that. We have a whole table in the back with lots of information and a comprehensive list of all the bills that have been filed this session, and if they're good or bad as they relate to transportation and property rights. So I encourage you to snag that when you get a chance. But
Thank you.
Well, it is wonderful to be here with all of y'all here tonight, and thank you all for showing up. I'll echo the sentiments. I think that part of winning is really actually just showing up. And I think that more and more folks are seeing that now. I myself am just recently kind of stepping up into the political realm more. EFF Austin has been around for a good while, actually since the foundation of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. I don't know if any of y'all, how many of y'all here are familiar with the EFF? All right, so a good amount. Do y'all remember back 1990, 1991 or so, when the Secret Service raided Steve Jackson Games and kind of bubbled that whole operation? All right, so we've got one person who remembers. So the EFF was formed as a result of that particular incident, because there was recognition of the fact that we have this whole new online realm, and who's going to protect our rights out there? Who's going to keep an eye on what's going on? And so I'm a technologist by trade, computer geek by trade, and so I understand kind of the ins and outs of how all this works. I understand the degree of the ease with which data is collected and aggregated and that sort of thing now. And so we're active again at this point. EFF Austin sort of waxed and waned over the years, and we feel like we're needed right now because online privacy and this entire domain, basically the pendulum needs to swing back in the direction of individual rights and protection of our information, our privacy. So tonight I'll tell you a little bit about a bill that we're working through at the state legislature, focused on geolocation tracking information. How many people have a cell phone here?
Why don't we let you move on into the second part of the question? We'll just keep the mic with you since you're at the end there.
All right.
And the question here is, could you all spend 2 minutes describing the various channels that you take, or the methods you take throughout a standard year, or maybe your cycle is 2 years, to advance your goals? And what I mean by cycle is, I know if you want to be active in the legislative session, you really need to start asking people to put in bills way before the session starts. So what is it, how do you plan this out to be most effective, and why don't you go right into it?
Sure. I'm probably the best person to start this one because we're building it as we go along. We really were just invited. How many of y'all are familiar with the Grits for Breakfast blog that Scott Henson writes on criminal justice here? So Scott and his partner Kathy Mitchell, who also happens to be my boss at Consumer Reports, they heard about this. Senator Patrick Leahy asked the telecommunications companies, well, how many requests do y'all receive per year from law enforcement, state and federal, for information, for subscriber data? That can be your email contents, your text messages, really just a record of your geolocation, which is everywhere your phone goes, just a map of everywhere you go, and your associations can be inferred from that, basically a diary of your digital life. And so the telecoms came back and said that they, in 2011, processed 1.3 million requests for data. So much so that they've had to build automated portals for this. This is getting more into the legislative piece, so we'll save that for a minute. So we were brought into this early this year. We've been making a lot of friends actually at the legislature because we're finding that our expertise is valuable. The perspective that we can provide as far as explaining how all this stuff works is needed. And so we're being actually asked to help out or to file additional bills as regards geolocation tracking information, email contents. We were asked to help out on the anti-drone bill that's up right now, not HB 912. And so we're kind of recognizing that we have a lot of work in front of us. And so we've begun developing out the different tool sets that we can use to organize people around the state. One tool that we use that I'm really excited about is called Nation Builder. And it's really just sort of a member database organizing tool put together by some of the smartest guys in the room these days. We have websites, we're looking at Twitter outreach, Facebook, these sorts of things. You have to go where the people are at. So I have a lot of background in that sort of online organizing piece of the puzzle, and so we're trying to put those parts into play and figure out how to get all of that to work out together. But then there's all the traditional fundraising and those pieces as well. So we have lots of ideas, and we're just figuring out how to make it all work together.
And we will open it up to audience participation at the end. So if someone would like to ask him to elaborate on that, we can definitely do it.
Well, great. Well, I feel like I'm on a nonstop treadmill, whether it's the session or in the legislature or not. With transportation, there is a role to play at the local, state, and federal levels. So literally, there's never a time to take your breath because there's always one of those levels of government that's in your business. So one of the things we do in between sessions is, and this is where we started, was at the local level. There were some roads, particularly the road that got me involved was US 281, goes all the way, as you know, from really the border all the way up to Canada. But 281 goes throughout our state. They wanted to come in and take and convert all of our existing free lanes into toll lanes. Complete taxpayer ripoff, highway robbery. Of course, that didn't sit well with the grassroots. So we really started our movement based on collecting signatures and signups at TxDOT public hearings. And we would use the open mic time during the public hearing format to educate people about what was wrong with this and the waste and the boondoggles and everything else that was going on. and get signups that way. And you'd educate people both through the microphone, and we would also bring lots of flyers. And just, you know, you guys have probably done a lot of this where you hand out flyers at public meetings because people just don't know what's really going on. So that's how we started. Then we started monitoring the local boards that were making the decisions, thumbs up or thumbs down on tolling. And here in Austin, they have one, and they have one in every city in the country that has a population of 50,000 or more, and they're called MPOs, Metropolitan Planning Organizations. And those literally are made up of local elected officials, and they're like little godfathers. Their own. You know, these guys literally have so much power and can dole out so much public money, and they can abuse the taxpayer like you wouldn't believe. And most of the time, they stack them with areas of town that aren't being affected by tolls. So it's hard for you in the areas that are affected to pressure these boards to do the right thing because they're just not in your district and they don't care if they toll you, because then that means more free road money for their district. So we do a lot at the MPO level. Then we also do a lot in the state legislature. And so we're having to juggle a lot of balls because, as you can imagine, you don't just walk into the session in January and expect that it's all going to fall into place. There takes a lot of groundwork. And we've just built relationships with a lot of legislators through the years because they would carry bills. Now, we didn't initially ask them to carry those bills, but you find the legislators that are going to be your best bet on carrying your bill based on the other types of bills they carry. So, for instance, Lois Colkhorst is one of our big fans with property rights bills, and she was the one that almost single-handedly helped us repeal the Trans-Texas Corridor last session. Took us 3 sessions, but we finally did it. Now, there's still lots of that going on.
Terri, why don't we
gone underground?
leave it for the legislative
Sure.
Just
But we also get involved in campaigns because that has to become an aspect as well. We have a PAC for that, but we do help candidates. I do robocalls for a lot of candidates to educate people about what their voting record was, or if they're a good guy, we want people to know and to vote for them for the right reasons. So we basically get involved at every level, and we've also done a lot of litigation. Sadly, that's one of the only things that gets their attention sometimes is when the taxpayers sue the government. So we have experience in that too. So anyway, that's kind of the overview, but you really can do a lot by educating people just through the public hearing process. So I would encourage you to keep getting involved in that if you're not already.
thank you.
Awesome. Ditto that. Definitely get involved. Some of the things that I do, I actually go around to a lot of different universities and colleges and I talk to the students because the students are a good voice and they are our future. So I go to the different groups. I talk to Republican groups. I talk to the Libertarian groups. I even try to talk to the Democratic groups, but I get kicked out of there. No, you would think, my goodness, I'm a poster child for the Democratic Party, right? I'm an African-American, gay male, in a long-term relationship for 14 years. You think they would love me, right? No way, they locked me out of the door. But yes, I definitely reach out to them, and I think education is the tool. So I actually travel to Lubbock. I talk to Texas Tech. I try to talk to every student group at Texas Tech. I go up to Baylor University. I try to talk to every student group at Baylor University. University of Texas, I would go there and talk to every student group at University of Texas. And just continue, do this little loop and continue to talk to them and let them know that I need their help and get them involved. So then what happens is I get them excited, and then they surprise me. Baylor University got 600 signatures in support of concealed carry on campus. Called me up and say, hey, Mike, can you come to Waco? We're going to go to the senator's office in Waco here, and we're going to deliver 600 signatures from Baylor University, because another group got together 100 signatures, so we have 600 that we want to turn in. I said, yeah, all right, I'll be there in a few minutes. I'm on my way. So we went and turned in those signatures. Another thing that I do is I actually will go after any company that attacks lawful gun ownership in this country. Groupon. That's right. Groupon decided that this year that they were going to stop any deals dealing with gun ranges, any shooting clays, or any gun deals at all. They decided, hey, we're not going to do those at all. So they decided that they were going to attack lawful gun ownership in this country. So I said, you know what? No, we're not going to stand for that, because you're telling citizens who take the time out of their busy schedule to learn gun safety, to learn the law surrounding carry that gun, to actually try to do the right thing. You're saying you're going to target that individual, you're going to target that person and punish them, and you're not going to help them out. You're only going to support the criminal. So I said, no, we're not going to do that. you know what, we're not doing business with you. If you don't want to do business with us, we're not giving you our money. So,
Thank you. Michael, I have a quick question for you before we move on. To go and speak to those student organizations, what does that normally require? Do you contact them directly? Do you have to get permission from the university?
yes, I definitely reach out to the president of the group, and I, will try to get their number, give them a call, and say, hey, let me, come down and talk to your group, and just, let you know some of the things we're working on, and I like to talk with you guys and get your input on some things as well.
Right.
See, what are some things that you're looking for? What are some things you want to change?
It's a great idea.
Yeah, and get in the door and definitely sit down and talk with them. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Well, we do operate on a 2-year cycle, and ours goes from July of an odd number year to July of the next odd numbered year. And we started in July because that's right after the last session ended. And as I mentioned earlier, we're a think tank. And so everything that we do is based on our research and based on the policy papers that we produce. So we sit down in July, and there's just under 40 employees at our think tank. And we sit down, and independent of any legislation, we start talking about the issues that we're concerned about. We highlight what the areas where we think government has grown too much and where we can reduce the size of government. We highlight problems that we see in legislation or in the law from the last legislative cycle. And we pick out the issues that we want to research and the issues that we want to talk about. And so we set up a schedule for our research, and each of us produces between 12 and 15 research papers each year. And that becomes the basis of our legislative work. And the way that happens is a variety of ways. A lot of times legislators read our stuff and contact us and say, I will file this bill for you, I agree 100%, write a draft up for me. And so we'll draft legislation for that legislator. Other times we have to do the legwork, and that means that we take our policy papers and we shop them to the legislature, and we say, this is what we think, these are the fixes that we could use in the legislature. Do you agree? And if they do, then we go through the same process where we draft up the legislation for them. And that's been actually a really important part of our work, is doing the draft itself, because legislative counsel doesn't always come up with the best draft. So we spent a lot of time educating ourselves on how you actually write the draft so that the legislators can just file it themselves without having to go through Leg Council. So then while we're in the legislative session itself, it's all about, the nonpartisan effort, the lobbying effort to get that legislation passed. And that's testifying in committee hearings, that's one-on-one meetings with legislators, and that's media outreach. We find it's really, really important to have a good spin on our issues in the media if they do become an issue. And so we'll do press releases and interviews and columns, and we have a weekly column in the Statesman that we use to kind of advance our goals. And then at the end of session, we take a look back and we see how many bills we were able to get passed, and we start all over again. And then the only other component to that is we do have a national effort named Right on Crime. There are some flyers on that in the back. We started this a couple years ago when we realized that there are conservatives and those on the right side of the aisle all over the country that want to start working on this issue on criminal and juvenile justice. They just don't know how. They don't have the words, they don't have the tools, they don't know what they should be talking about. And so we brought together a group of conservative leaders to give them those tools and give them those words and give them the research that they need. And Right on Crime has now been in all 50 states in some form. And so we're helping leaders in other states work on legislation and do media outreach in those issues as well.
Thank you. I know that I would love for the Libertarian Party to have a weekly column in the Statesman. That would be wonderful. But maybe during question and answer, we can talk more about that media outreach and ways for smaller organizations to get that done. I think that would be very helpful. Mr. Simpson?
Well, I guess my organization might be a little bit distinct in some ways. We have a couple of different arms for advocacy. Actually, I wanted to back up. The other, I guess, kind of the fifth priority for us is privacy and technology, and we're working with Greg on basically all that stuff, but particularly the cell phone tracking bill. And so, actually, those are some things I would like to talk about when we get into specifics of ledge work. I think there's a lot that folks in this room can do to ensure privacy. So anyway, but we'll get to that. My organization's a little bit unique in terms of this panel. We make an effort to activate or get involved our activists and our folks that are already members of the organization, and then others that are interested in the specific issues. So, for example, we worked with parents in the Dallas area that were concerned about suspensions of their children, basically, kind of over incarceration of the classroom. So we put out materials. Both information about our issues and also kind of activist toolkits. And often when folks just start Googling for what do I do if my kid's suspended, they'll start finding like our youth rights manual and other materials like that, look through our website and starts to see that there's some opportunity for working with our organization on local issues. So we've been developing that. It's certainly, we haven't perfected it, but we're definitely feel like we're moving forward. We had a few local folks that we've actually been able to coordinate and do ledge visits with. So we're starting to even see some of our local work start to be a part of our legislative work, and we certainly kind of incorporate it into litigation as well. So we've got the kind of activist outreach. We also do a lot of work in the media. I think that it's absolutely critical when you are talking about issues that are easily misunderstood, like privacy, like drug law reform, to have the right messaging so that people aren't confused by what the words you're saying and miss the kernel of truth, right? And so, I think echoing what Jeanette and probably everybody else would say, thinking about how you portray your issue in the media is incredibly important. And it has to do with your effectiveness in all the other arenas that I guess we kind of operate in, and I think just about anywhere. Then we also do legislative work. I work with a group of volunteers and UT grad students, and we go and testify on bills that are important to the ACLU. A lot of them, almost all are civil liberties. And then finally we do litigation, which is probably what folks actually know us for. So we try to coordinate all that into one coherent strategy, which also is not always perfect.
Thank you.
Okay, well, TXNORML, we, in the past year, I guess, have really grown so that now our focus year-round is, again, it's always outreach, but now we're able to have specific outreach. For example, I'm trying to reach out to more women because that's in the public polls, we see that women are 10 to 12% behind men in favoritism of reforming drug laws. So in coming out publicly and being a woman in the movement, just by setting the example, I try to encourage more women to become involved and to talk, just to have the conversation, which is the biggest outreach tool that we have, trying to make it a public conversation. So we also do that by an athletic group that one of our directors started. So we have people walking around in a group around Town Lake or doing a 5K or a 10K soon. All wearing shirts that say Team Hope Through Cannabis with a huge list of ailments and conditions on the back that it can help. So it's just raising awareness that we're out there, we're part of the community, we're not just inviting you to our reggae show and expecting you to act exactly like we do, and that's the only way that you can be a part of our group. Instead, we're trying to reach out to people on other levels and just connect and show that we're part of the community. We're no longer a subculture that we tried to be and had to be for so long. We also reach out to people in our movement that we know there's a specific need for, like patients. In fact, our director of patient outreach is here tonight, Vincent Lopez. So I want to acknowledge that if anybody wants to speak to him. We also recently have a veterans liaison who is not local in Austin, but he is in Killeen, and so he's very active. He's also a school teacher. So we're just reaching out to groups that either have a need or that we're not really hearing from, and we want them to be a part of this conversation. And otherwise, just in having that conversation and bringing it to the public, making it okay and not taboo to talk about, I think the most important thing is to find out what people's concerns are on any level, like education or where we're spending our money, and try to explain to them how changing our drug laws could change something and benefit their own concern. I think the most important thing in talking to people is that you can't expect them to agree with you on all points, and you can't try to force your exact method of your message. You have to find out where their interest lies and then kind of conform your message. Believe me, there's something affiliated with the drug war that you can reach out and connect to somebody on. So I think that's just a big key in awareness.
Thank you. You get to start the next round, which is what you're doing this legislative session. And I don't think we have time to go into detail about specific bills, but if you could, a general overview of what your goal is, and also, what does your organization do, focus on most? Is it lobbying days? Is it testifying? Is it, talking to the legislators and providing research? So if we could get 2 minutes on that from each of you, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, well, this was our big year to really make an attempt at lobbying and at being really involved with the legislature, not just on our own as individuals, whoever felt like doing it, but up until this year, we had put together an activist training guide, held an activist training day where we tried to get people involved to go on their own, and here's how you find out who your legislator is, here's how you contact them, and some guidelines. This year we stepped it up a bit and did that as well, but we also we put out a voter's guide. There's some copies of all this stuff back there if you guys want to take a look at it. We made our first attempt at a voter's guide. Most of the people we heard from were libertarians, thank you. So we had some really positive responses. But I will say that even the Republicans that we had, even the worst that it wasn't bad all the way across the board. So I think that showed a good thing, a good climate temperature kind of check for us. So that was helpful. And then we put together, we realized that a lot of people just are not educated. So we can't just assume that they're going to pass a bill that they, one, don't even know about, and two, wouldn't understand anyway. So we put together a legislative education package, and that's back there as well. We distributed that amongst our members, and we distributed it most often, if we could, by constituent, and otherwise the Texas NORML representatives brought those to the legislators. We tried to keep track of the feedback and connect people with their legislators. And we did hold a lobby day this session, first time, a lot of lessons learned, but it was a good day. And we're just starting to build those relationships and make our presence known at the Capitol. So it's a first effort, but I think we took a lot of big steps this session, and looking forward to trying harder and learning how to do it better next session.
Thank you. I think
if I could just say, I don't have, there is information in the packet, but there are two bills in the House right now. One has been in committee already, which is a decrim bill. It would just lower possession for up to 1 ounce to a fine only. And the other one is an affirmative defense bill, which would just, and I say just because I think it's important to emphasize to these conservatives who don't understand what these do, that they are not legalization bills. Neither one of them are. So when that's the concern, you can't go at them with, weed should be legal and we should tax it, because that's not what either one of these bills does. So there's really just not a point to that conversation. So being concise and emphasizing what the bill doesn't, which are their concerns, and emphasizing what it does and how it helps. The other one opens up a conversation between patients and their doctors, and we're waiting for that to be scheduled. The committee hearing has been requested but not scheduled. So look up those two bills, HB 184, HB 594. Texas NORML's website has information on it. But if the affirmative defense bill passed, then not only could a patient talk to his doctor, and then neither would need to be concerned, but if the patient were arrested, then the doctor and the patient could have that conversation with the jury, which I think is an important way to sell it, that all you're doing is trying to open up the jury and the doctor's office with the truth.
Thank you. I will say that I think the LP is transitioning from encouraging individuals to going up there and getting our, complete, thorough legislative agenda, sort of at the same process you are in. And then also I'd love to hear about the lessons from lobbying day. So maybe if someone wants to follow up either of those two in questioning, I think that could be very useful for the LP and where they are now. But go ahead, sorry.
Oh, no problem. Well, let's see. So the question is, what are we doing right now in the legislature, and what are some
and how are you going about it?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think that there are a couple ways to summarize it. One way to think about it is that a lot of the legislators, they are legislators for 6 months out of every 2 years, and there are thousands of bills. And so our expertise on any little niche issue for them is incredibly valuable. And then our willingness to run issues around from office to office, to be the person that links the Senate to the House, basically all the things that people assume happen internally up at the Capitol that maybe do or don't, like, you can be a part of making all that happen, and that helps move your agenda. And the more folks that are doing those kinds of things help move the kind of bills you want to see out there. So you have an opportunity to, I would definitely highlight the opportunity to give your representative or senator direct input on bills you think should be filed, or bills that they are filing, or bills that they're considering maybe. And then the other big opportunity is testimony in a hearing. If there's something that you have expertise on that you want to go talk about, hearings are a great time to kind of give some input to the committee. I wanted to just quickly talk about a couple of bills that we're going to be watching in terms of our goals that all really relate to privacy and technology, and to some degree really law enforcement overreach into our lives. One is the tracking of students at schools, working with Heather and a lot of other folks on basically ending the practice of tracking students internally within schools. Then also we're monitoring all the drug testing bills, so required to do a drug test before you can receive TANF benefits, before you can receive unemployment. We're working on Facebook privacy and social media privacy that would bar employers from demanding your password to your private inbox before you can be hired, which unfortunately is happening in some places. And then we're working on the cell phone tracking and the drone bill and the email confidentiality. And then one thing that I think I'd like to work on someday, and there's folks in this group that would probably understand why, there's the automatic license plate reader is a real issue that hasn't been addressed by but I think probably, yeah. So there's at least one person that's familiar. But I think that's an issue that the ledge has really let fly, and somebody needs to get them moving on that as well. And the final one is DNA collection upon arrest rather than conviction. The ACLU obviously believes that you are innocent until proven guilty, and we should not be collecting DNA until you're convicted. So, thanks.
Thank you.
Well, our legislative approach is very burdensome sometimes. There's quite a bit going on this year. The foundation as a whole is tracking 1,500 bills. My center alone is tracking just over 700 bills. Only 30 of those are bills that we've written, so unfortunately there's some other ones that we have to work on. And the reason that there's so many is that every single time we read a bill that had a criminal penalty for what we don't think should be a criminal penalty, or that increased occupational licensing or put more requirements on occupational licensing, we put it in our track to track it and make sure that we were testifying against in committee. And that should give you an idea of how many times the legislature slaps a criminal penalty or an occupational license in something, that there's over 600 bills on something relating to those issues right now in the legislature. Our exact efforts, we always begin with our sponsor, the person that we're working with. If it's a bill that we support, we make sure that they know we support them and they're available to provide talking points or research if they need it. If it's a bill that we oppose, you always go and you tell them that you oppose it. They hate to be blindsided with this stuff in committee, and they're actually very willing to work with people if they know that you oppose one of their bills. So that's a really high priority for us. We actually won't testify against it if we haven't gone to tell them that we oppose it. So that's actually something I'll be doing the next week, is making my rounds and sharing some unfortunate news with some people. So after we reach out to the sponsor, then you begin the committee work, and that's making sure that you have the votes lined up in committee. That's making personal meetings with every single one of the committee members to find out where they stand on it and see if you can answer any of their questions beforehand. Because often they've already made up their minds before the committee hearing. So public testimony, unfortunately, doesn't mean as much as we wish it did. So once you make sure that you have the votes, then you get the hearing, and your sponsor has to request the hearing from the committee chair that the bill is referred to. So as soon as we know that we have enough bills to support it, enough votes to support it, or enough votes to kill it, we make sure that the sponsor knows that it's ready for a hearing. After hearing, then you begin to reach out to folks that are going to be able to get it to the floor, and that's a different process whether you're working in the House or the Senate. There's a calendars committee in the House that has to vote for something to go to the floor. In the Senate, it's the 2/3 rule. So you have to make the reach out in that sense to get it to the floor, because it's an uphill battle. There's a lot of stuff that comes out of committee favorably reported. Not everything gets to the floor, and that's something that you have to be very proactive about, is making sure people know you need this to get to the floor. And then you start the whole process over again in the next House. Some of the specific stuff, I'm just going to run through our specifics really, really quickly. We're working on legislation that would provide more effective probation monitoring in the counties. We feel like if they're doing a good job, the state should reward them. If they're doing a bad job, the state should not reward them. We're working on state jail reform. About 80% of the offenders in state jails are either low-level drug offenders or low-level property offenders. These are not threats to the public safety and should not be in a state jail. So we're working on requiring, instead of a term in the state jail, probation for those offenders, which we know will be more effective and cheaper for the state anyway. victim offender conferencing. When someone has committed a crime against a particular victim, it's that victim who has been harmed and not the state. We think that that victim should have more control over the process and not the government. Thank you. Rule of lenity. This would require, if there's a particular term in an offense, an element or a mental state that is unclear, it gets construed against the state rather than the defendant, because the state's the one that wrote the legislation, so they should lose if they're unclear about it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that one's been filed, and I think we're going to have a hearing in the next 2 weeks on that one. A sunset review of all occupational licensing. Texas is one of the worst states about this. Over a third of all of our occupations, people working in Texas are under a license and have to ask the government for permission to just go to work. And so we're going to pass or work on legislation that will require a sunset review of all occupational licenses to see if it's truly necessary for the government to get that involved in the free market.
I hate to cut you off, but we might need to move on at
sure.
this moment. I will say thank you, and especially thank you for the tip about approaching the sponsor first if you oppose a bill. I think that sounds like excellent advice. That
Sorry, I dragged on so long.
you wouldn't know unless you were an insider. So thank you.
Some of the things I do is I would teach 120 people a week concealed handgun license, the course. And I stand in front of my class and I'll ask them, and I say, well, what has brought you to this point that makes you want to get a concealed handgun license? What's going on right now in your life that you want to get a concealed handgun license? And they'll tell me, well, what's going on in the federal government? And I said, okay. And I'll go around the entire room, and everyone will say the same thing, because what's going on in the government? They're talking about taking our guns away and all this other stuff. And then I'll let them know that in Travis County, we have 600,000 registered voters. There's 600,000 registered voters in Travis County. Out of the 600,000, only 10% come out and vote in their elections. Only 10%. And so I asked them, did you vote? And then, I informed them that our legislators only meet odd years. Last time they met was 2011. They're meeting right now until June 2013. Next time they meet is 2015. Things like open carry was on the table in 2011. Open carry did not pass. Do you know that in the state of Texas is one of the very few states that you cannot open carry a handgun? Most states in the United States, you can open carry a handgun. Texas is one of those states you cannot. We lost open carry back in 1995 when we got concealed carry. So they took open carry away because we weren't paying attention. Right? So you got to get involved and pay attention to the way some of these bills are written and what happens in committee. What did you just say? What happens when they come out of...
Well, then you have conference committee.
Conference committee, exactly. Because then they will water them down. So you got to pay attention to what goes on through the entire process. Make sure it comes out of calendars. And what happens in conference committee, because that's very important. So, those are just, some of the things you got to focus on.
Thank you.
Well, we, at the end of every session, we always put together a legislative agenda. What are the things we want to accomplish on freedom to travel and property rights type issues? And so we make sure that every legislator, particularly the Transportation Committee members, get that from us. In enough time to be able to think about what bills they might want to sponsor for us. Then we try to meet one-on-one with lawmakers, particularly, again, the Transportation Committee, sometimes the Land and Resource Management Committee, because that's the property rights stuff. But I have to say, with ACLU and TPPF, they get access that grassroots groups do not get. I will tell you that right now. It takes me months sometimes to get on a member's calendar. They have every way under sunshine, all these excuses why they can't meet with us, but if someone like TPPF walks through their door, they're instantly given access. I've seen it happen. So it's very sad, but when you're grassroots and you don't have a paid staff, somehow you're just kicked to the curb, like you don't somehow do worthy work for the citizens. So that's the hard part, is getting access. But if you can meet one-on-one, we do definitely reach out to the members so they know if we oppose their bill before we go in committee and do that. Then we also have lobby days as well. I think this has been our fourth one that we did just last week. And we had our largest group yet, and it was wonderful. We do a lot with that if you want to know more details with it. But one of the things we are always sure to hand out, we try to do it after the bill filing deadline, and then I pour through hundreds of bills myself. There is no staff. I don't have anyone to help me. And we put together our comprehensive bill list. And these are just the bills that were the most egregious or are bills that we are trying to push. There are literally hundreds of bills in transportation that we have to follow, and most of them are bad, and we have to try and kill them all single-handedly because we're pretty much the only group that focuses on transportation in the state of Texas. So we've tried to align ourselves with other groups. There's over 300 grassroots groups that we work with, including groups like the Libertarian Party, liberty-minded groups, you name it, Tea Parties, 912s. A lot of different Democrat groups have similar issues that align with ours. And so another thing we'll do is testify in committee like everyone's talked about. And we do like to issue a lot of press releases. We always start our lobby day with a press conference on the South Capitol steps. And we always make sure there's really good visuals with lots of signs, stop tolling Texas or whatever, stop selling our roads or whatever. There's all kinds of little messaging things we can do with that. And we did get pretty good press coverage. I don't know if you saw it on Austin TV on Tuesday night, but that was us. Then we also like to be, as was mentioned, a liaison or a resource. We're pretty much the only one that's not an official think tank that puts together white papers. I do a lot of extensive research. The abuses of tolling worksheet you see in the back was by going through TxDOT's 10-year plan, they call the UTP, and found out all the taxpayer subsidies that are going into these toll roads. That means they're building roads with your tax money, but charging you again to drive on them. Our legislators were not aware of this, and so I went and found ways to prove it. And when I added up the figures, in the next 10 years, they will spend $10 billion in tax money. This makes their eyes pop open and realize just how bad the abuses are that are taking place. But if we hadn't put that together, I wouldn't have been able to do that. So it's very important to do that and providing talking points and such. We also do legislative report cards at the end of every session, and we also do voter guides. All of this is really hard to do with unpaid volunteers every session, going through hundreds of votes sometimes to put these together. We also put out a bill alert. If it gets out of committee, that's when the animal really gets big, because now it's not just a few transportation committee members you're dealing with. Now you're dealing with the entire legislature of either the House or Senate or both. So we do a lot of bill alerts, both electronically, and we'll even have volunteers come through the Capitol and put it underneath their doors or personally hand it to every single office, so they are without excuse when they say, oh, I didn't know what was in that bill. You know how they do this all the time, right? Oh, I didn't know I voted for that. Well, they're without excuse on transportation because they are always put on notice before they take the vote.
Terri, I think we're going to have to cut it short, unfortunately.
If I could just finish with one thing, we also like to do open letters to legislators and get a lot of media play with that, where we'll do an open letter to the governor, lieutenant governor, and the speaker, for instance, and tell them what we want and what we don't want. And we have it signed on by hundreds of groups. And that really helps get their attention too. And we actually saw committee members running into a room one time, sorting through, looking to see if a group in their backyard was a co-signer to that list. So those are the things that the grassroots versus a think tank policy type group have to do to try and get their attention, because we don't get their attention just by being a certain group like TPPF or whatever. They garner a ton of respect around the Capitol for a very good reason. But grassroots groups have to kind of go at it from a different angle, so that's kind of why I mentioned that.
Thank you. And it sounds like you do incredible work, and I, for one, would love to hear more about the open letters. That sounds like a very powerful tool. But it's Greg's turn.
So I got myself very fortunate to have a couple of very, very good mentors as regards entering the legislative process at the state level. I'm working with some folks who have been very tapped into how things operate at the state legislature for on the order of 20 years. So they've been able to see the importance of relationship building, the importance of how things change over time, how things wax and wane, and understand that there's an important strategic factor as far as timing is concerned. And so that's one of the reasons why we feel like right now is a good opportunity for the legislation that we're working on as regards technology and privacy. So some of the things that we are doing, and again, I'm learning as I go along. I try to see what sort of lessons that I can glean. So I'll pass along what we've seen here, a lot of which are echoing what the other panelists have been saying so far. One thing that is important, I think, for me to recognize is that as a citizen, you can initiate a lot of these processes yourselves. You can draft legislation. You can go to a hearing. You can go to your elected officials' offices You can go to any of the officials' offices, and talk with their staff members, and let them know what you're working on. This is an important factor because I think if more people knew how easy it is to actually get involved in the process, then we would have a different sort of society. So I want to emphasize that fact. One thing that we've done with the geolocation tracking bill, as well as the email contents bill, is been very careful as far as the selection of who we want to actually file the bill. So we look at the members of the committees that are likely going to see the bill, and we try to find one of the members of the committee to actually file the bill on our behalf. So naturally, then they'll want the bill to actually come up for hearing and have their bill heard. So then comes a strategy that we learned from the drone bill this year, which we thought was very interesting, which is they actually went to, well, with a bill you can actually have the person who files the bill, and then you can have up to 4 other joint authors of the bill and as many co-authors of the bill as you would like. And so this is a way of demonstrating the belief in that bill and interest in seeing that bill pass. So on the drone bill, what we saw is they actually instituted a strategy to get as many co-authors as they could. And at this point, they have on the order of over 100 co-authors and joint authors for that bill, which is important because there's 150 representatives in the House. So that demonstrates something about the likelihood of that passing. So we've been looking to do that same sort of thing, and for the geolocation tracking bill, we're up to, at last count, 69 authors and co-authors. So we think that's a pretty good one. Then we're looking really carefully at who you are actually reaching out to, how you're expending those resources to go and talk to people, and you have to be careful about who you look to next. So we look to the committee members, as was mentioned earlier, and also the calendar committee members also, because you do want to make sure that the bill is filed on the House side, which I didn't know was different on the Senate. That's good to know. So then we are also looking to bring in subject matter experts for the hearing. And we have, it's been excellent actually for the geolocation tracking piece, because it's all around the country. Folks are waking up to this going on, and there's interest in legislation being filed, but there's only a few real good experts, and we've been able to connect with those folks and are bringing them down for the hearing and to talk to our legislators, and so they can hear from the people who know everything about it. And so that's an important piece. Then,
is this the last then?
This is the last.
We might have to move on. Okay,
Sure.
Go ahead then.
So after this session, what we're going to do, like everyone else, is to prepare for 2015. And instead of doing the research and reports, or rather a different way of doing the research that we're looking at is open records requests, which also are very easy to initiate. Basically, it takes a stamp. Say, give me this. And so it's not quite that easy as far as the process, because it kind of becomes a Kafkaesque maze of sorts with all sorts of resistance, but that's really telling as well. So what we want to do is, well, I won't get into what we're going to be looking for because it's interesting, but we want to do this on a mass scale. And so I want to direct your attention to a group called Muckrock News. They are looking to actually automate, in some sense, the open records request process and do it in a way where they provide you with basic language for it all. Like, you go to their website, you say you want to reach out to this agency, and they send off the request. They have the entire calendar, which is very, very important as far as the number of business days that they have to respond to here. And then after this point, if they get any response back, they automatically scan it and do the OCR recognition, post it online, which is also important because that's that accountability and
very powerful tool.
So
maybe someone can follow up on that during questioning.
Sure.
And we do have one thing before we go to open audience participation, and this is a challenge to the forum. The question is, what can one individual who is not a paid activist or works a 9-to-5 job, has children, what is the one thing, and I'm looking for a one-word answer, if possible, that that person can do that is powerful and effective for whatever their cause of greatest concern might be? And we are going to start with you, Greg. So, one-word answer?
So concerned about one word.
Well, I know it's hard to condense everything into one word, so I'm sorry to not give you warning.
No. It's hard for me to not blabber on a little bit. So I think it's conquering fear. It's not any particular thing. It's conquering fear and apathy. I'm reading a book right now by the... No, I can't tell you.
Sorry. That was already more than one word.
So,
Question time after this,
Show
so I
up.
promise.
show up.
Aside from show up, I'd say phone calls. Alerting legislators that you're for or against certain bills, because that's one of the few ways we can actually weigh in before the decisions are made or before the final vote happens. If we don't have a radioactive level of public outcry on certain bills, there's no stopping the train. So I would say phone calls.
Thank you.
Politely post something on their Facebook page. They have paid staffers that sit there and monitor their Facebook page all day long. Post something on their Facebook page. Be polite about it.
Thank you.
Vote.
That's mine too. But I would say really quickly, I think along with that, this, as libertarians, you all have an interesting kind of leverage with the legislature, because I think just about every mainstream Republican that is in office at the ledge is a little bit worried about a libertarian coming into their primary. Yeah. So I think that, I'm not saying you should threaten anybody or anything like that, but A, you should vote, but B, you should also think about ways that you can encourage them to take your agenda into the agenda they're forwarding. I think you all are really particularly well placed in the political system. So.
Thank you.
I think my one word would be educate. And like I said, our packet that we sent to the legislators is called an education package. So I think it's an important approach. And I furthered that in my mind, confirmed that in my mind. I was putting together letters to go to our members, telling them whether their legislator is on the fence or supportive or against. And I had to rephrase it in my mind and change that letter to, instead of being your member, your representative is against this, instead now this is the education letter to me. Your member needs to be educated on whatever the specific thing is. Just a different way of thinking about it.
Thank you. Good. So now we're going to open it up for audience participation. I see multiple hands already. The way this is going to work is we're going to keep the mics up here, so you have to project. Introduce yourself. Well, state your question. If you're with an organization, state that. Please just ask the question, not lots of background. And tell us who your question is directed towards, or if it's everyone on the panel. So the very first hand I saw was Ben Farmer.
Thank you, Proctor, for recognizing my question. I'm Ben Farmer, I'm a Libertarian representative from Odessa, Texas. My question is for Mr. Simpson. I'm curious if he is familiar with the Austin-based group Peaceful Streets Project. And what is it finally going to take for the ACLU to get intimately involved in the Austin Police Department corruption?
Well,
Thanks for having me. I think that we have tried in the past to work with local activists on those issues, and in the past couple of years we haven't been as involved as we should be in that particular issue. I think that one thing that you should take heart about is that we're actually hiring a community organizer located in our Austin office in the next 3 months who will be trained in and start working here. And that's exactly the kind of stuff we need a community organizer for. So, and I think it is an important issue.
May I suggest Antonio Beeler?
Yes, we consider him considered.
I have Pat Dixon, and then over there, and then Jim. So let's go, Pat first.
Pat Dixon, I'm the state chair of the party. This is for the whole panel. Is there something typically that somebody could, at a hearing, they could say or do that's going to hurt your cause? They may be in favor of what you're doing, but you're like, oh, please don't say this, please don't do that. Any advice you would give people?
I just check with the author ahead of time. I think the author or the sponsor would be my response. But
I just think being on point with what the bill actually does. I just went to my first committee hearing and I didn't even intend to testify because I thought I'd be running over straight from work at the end of the day. But the last person, who we thought was going to be the last person, was in so many places that no one could really follow him, at least, after being there for 3 hours. So I think being considerate, and I wouldn't have gone up, but for that fact, I went up only just because that couldn't be what the last thing was in their minds. And the chairman afterwards even said that was good that you did that, because he was even thinking the same thing, that don't do this. This is going to be the last thing we hear. So I think we all have a lot we want to say, but I try to, in my own group, try to remind people what it looks like when a car drives down the road and has every space covered in a bumper sticker. That you might like some of the sentiments, but it's really hard to get a hold of it. So you have to be really concise and ask yourself, does this information I'm relaying to these professionals who are at work relate to these 2 pieces of paper that are in front of them? That's all this bill does. That's all they care about. That's what they want to get through. And the personal stories are great, but they're even more impactful if the bill would actually affect that personal story.
Does anybody else have something to add?
Yeah. Don't interrupt the representatives when you're testifying. It drives them crazy. They think that they should not ever be interrupted, and so they won't listen to you, unfortunately. And then the other thing is try not to accuse them of anything. I was at a hearing. Along those lines. That's the only thing they'll remember. I was at a hearing on a bill, and someone started accusing all of the members of the committee of being racist. And whether or not that's true, that's the only thing they're going to remember from that person. They're not going to remember all the excellent points they made on that bill. The only thing they're going to walk around saying is, okay, that person thinks I'm a racist. So, demeanor and messaging is very, very important with politicians and their egos.
I was going to say that too. One of the things, like on, for instance, the Sunset Bill, they're usually several hundred pages long, and there's a lot of things you have to cover, and you only get 3 minutes. Sometimes they'll cut you down to even 2 minutes. So what we'll do is, if we have a group of activists up there to testify, we will split up the areas of concern among us all so that they don't hear just the same 3 things from 20 people. A lot of times it's better if you use variety in your approach to the legislators so that you can have some people cover this, some people cover that, and you kind of work your whole agenda that way. And I would definitely follow up and say that you don't want to insult them. You need to be polite, even though we know that they can be absolute, like Red Army something or others. It's like you have to hold your tongue and be gracious in how you deliver it, because I think that's how they really take you seriously on a policy level. Is if you're, polite in how you approach them and not, accusing them of being different things. But I think one other thing that I always worry about on tolling is that there's tolling that we feel is permissible and tolling that is not. And so the worst thing for me is when I go up there and someone says, well, I'd be okay with it if you just, and I'm like, oh God, here we go. Because they basically just gave them permission to move the bill. And when you're trying to kill a bill, you don't want to give them any excuses to move that bill if they do some little tweak to it. Because most of the time, your nice little tweaks that they say, okay, we'll put the public vote in there, and then suddenly it'll make it okay that we're ripping you off. They pull the public vote out in conference. You are never going to get those things that they promise you, I've found, and they will rip it out so fast. So to us, if there's a bill we're trying to kill, just work with us on killing the bill, or work with us on moving a bill, rather than trying to say, well, I'd be okay if we, and if you're kind of doing this negotiating, if they see one sliver of weakness, they are going to exploit it. So I would just caution you to make sure you know, at least from a grassroots point of view, what it is we want you to focus on or say, and kind of stick with that, because sometimes you can actually make it worse to come up there and kind of give them wiggle room. So anyway.
Thank you.
I'll just add one process note that I thought was interesting, is that you don't actually have to go and testify in person. You can go ahead and put in written comments. You basically go to where the hearing is at. They have cards at the back. You can put down your name, whether you support or oppose the bill, and then you have written comments. Just make copies for all of the committee members, and you hand the papers and the card to the clerk. And that's it.
Thank you.
We also have in the House this year an electronic registration for bills. So usually about an hour, depends on the committee, but usually about an hour before the committee is scheduled to begin. Like if you have to go to work, you know you can't stick around for a committee, but you want to say, I do not want this bill, or I really am in favor of this bill, I want it passed. You can go to the Capitol. You can just do the meters even, because you can just, and in the Capitol parking garage, you can get the first 2 hours free. So if you want to run in, register for a bill, and then go to work, you can do that now, and you don't have to wait for the cards. The Senate still does a card-based system, so you still have to just go a few minutes before the committee hearing.
I'm sorry,
and do
could it
that.
be a little quieter out there? It got noisy all of a sudden. Let's not do that.
But the kiosks are great. It will record your ad name and address and organization name and everything, so you can just basically click a button and it'll fill it all in for you after you've done it one time. You can save your information, and you can just go down the list and you can leave. You don't even have to be staying at the Capitol all day and do oral testimony. And so it's made it really easy for the public to weigh in.
Yes, that does make it much easier. James Golston? Oh, sorry. Yes. you.
I'm Alan Patterson, Chair of the Tarrant County Libertarian Party. I have a question for Terri with Turf. Do you guys get involved with federal transportation projects?
Absolutely.
Are you familiar with CSA 2010?
No, what is that?
It's a comprehensive driver safety reform package. It involves whether the driver has paid his child support.
Oh boy.
I want to.
Things of that nature. I was wondering if you guys legislated on the federal level at all with transportation issues.
Yes, we have dabbled a little. It's a very big animal to steer, because even though Texas is a big state and we have a lot of representatives from our state, it's really hard when you have 49 other states that you have to deal with. But we do work our delegation. For instance, I know who the House Transportation Subcommittee members are, who represents us in the Senate committee, and that sort of a thing. And then we work with those members and let them know what we want, and particularly the federal highway bill. That's pretty much the only thing we've had time to deal with. But we're very opposed to Agenda 21, sustainable development, all the stuff that threatens our freedom to travel at every level. We try and fight it everywhere we see it. And so a lot of that's going to be in bills other than the federal transportation bill, but that's the one that usually takes up all our time. MAP 21 passed last summer, and we were very involved in that.
Okay, thank you.
Jim Stutzman?
I'm Jim Stutzman, Libertarian Committee member. Thanks for coming, and my question is for Mr. Foster. Now, technology is a good thing in general, I think, and I'm positive, as is everyone in the room, there's tons of junk coming down that we must stop because of that. But have we considered, and can we write something that would be a law that these Hanyaks thinks is so good, that if you abuse this technology in a certain way, well then maybe you ought to do 20 years.
Well, it depends on what you mean by abuse, I think. And I think that there's so many different facets and pieces of the puzzle.
Can I define abuse?
Sure.
Anything that affects our liberty, our property, and our freedom. That's
Okay.
abuse. It goes against the Constitution or the Bill of Rights.
Well, I think that what we're seeing here recently is actually that the Constitution is kind of on a roll, I guess is one way to put it. You're seeing actually federal judges around the country who are starting to step up. And actually, National EFF had a pretty remarkable victory yesterday at the federal level where, do y'all know what national security letters are? These are the gag orders that the FBI can issue with a subpoena that says that the telecommunication provider has to fork over the subscriber data, and they're not allowed to tell the customer. They're not allowed to speak publicly about it at all. It's, I believe it came along with the Patriot Act. And yesterday at the federal level, they just ruled that national security letters are unconstitutional.
Yes.
So there's a 90-day period where the Department of Justice can appeal, which wouldn't that be interesting? And but there's a lot of examples like that around the country, actually. I can give you several more, but basically I feel like the pendulum's swinging back in the direction of a little more sanity about all this stuff.
Thank you. More questions? I saw your hand first.
This is really for all 6 of you. What are you doing out there to get juries to do their jobs? I mean, with groups like the Fully Informed Jury Associations and so on. Because a lot of this stuff could be nullified if juries would just do their jobs.
Well, in case of transportation, the litigation that we've pursued generally doesn't go to a jury trial. A lot of them are administrative type hearings, like the National Environmental Policy Act is the federal law that we've sued under, and won every time, by the way. And on that one, it is administrative law. So most everything's just done back and forth with briefs between lawyers. We're not even usually in court on that one. There was one case where we sued TxDOT for their taxpayer-funded lobbying, which violates state law. And that one didn't go to a jury because the state has all these fun little mechanisms that allow them to do a fast-track appeal. It completely, to me, violates due process and our constitutional rights. It needs to be challenged, but I don't have many resources to do it just yet, but I will if I can. And that is where basically before you even have your case heard in court at the trial level, they can kick you up to the appeals court by this thing called plea to the jurisdiction, which is where the state claims sovereign immunity and that they are basically immune from the consequences of their decisions. And so anyway, it kicks you up to appeals court before you even get the chance to have a jury trial. So there's a lot of things, at least in our world, where I would love a jury trial, because I'm pretty sure that I could get the jury to agree with what we're saying.
Well, I think some of the other organizations might deal more directly with juries, right? Or jury education efforts.
I would just say real briefly that in the criminal world, 96, 97, 98% of all cases are dealt with plea deals rather than the jury. So we think it's a lot more effective to make sure the law is in the right place rather than waiting for the small minority of cases that do go to the jury.
Are we?
Just basically the same thing. I mean, we encourage people to take it to a jury, but most people just can't afford the time and the expense of doing so. And if somebody will go to a jury, I mean, we will be there. We've been there, and it makes news when they do. If somebody will fight it all the way and they can get an attorney to go with them to go to court and go to a jury for 2 grams, then we'll be right there with them. But it just doesn't happen very often. People face 10 years or a felony, and then they're offered probation. They're going to take probation. So it just doesn't happen enough for us to affect much there.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to do Ken Stanford and then one question after that.
I got a question.
Okay, Ken.
Okay, my question is for Ms. Terri Hall. Have you ever thought about taking on the DOT for the double jeopardy of fines inflicted on DUI cases, whether or not they are found guilty?
You know, we have not delved into anything having to do with DUI. We just don't have the resources really, because we're just so buried under all the other stuff we're doing. But I can tell you that we are looking at some federal challenges, because the interstate highway system, when it was first conceived by President Eisenhower back in the 50s, it was all about facilitating commerce. And now we're seeing, it was facilitating commerce, but ultimately was for national defense first. That was the whole purpose of the interstate highway system. And now with this slice and dice and this chopping up of our highway system into toll and non-toll and the strict restrictions that are coming down on our travel, we think that there's going to be some ripe cases for really coming at them on just right to travel in general, because all of those things are being eroded very, very quickly. Pretty much every state is doing the same thing. And we're dealing with, multi-billions of dollars of public works projects, and that's what makes sometimes transportation really, really tough to fight, because you're going against all the what I call banksters and all the bond guys and all the Goldman Sachs and everybody else. I mean, that's who's crawling all over our highway department all the time, and that keeps us rather busy before we even delve into the DUI aspect. But maybe some other panelist has an idea on that.
I say take it to the media and make it sexy for them. Nothing like standing in front of the media and sticking to your talking points. Stick to those 1 points, that 1 point, at those 2 points or 3 points, and just hammer them down with those talking points. there's a bill right now before a legislator where if you have a concealed handgun license, well, if you have a concealed handgun license, you're held to a much higher standard. So a police officer can get charged with a crime, and still keep their badge and their gun. But a CHO holder can lose their license, if they will lose it if it's charged, and they will lose it if, for 7 years if it's revoked. But a police officer, they can still keep their badge and gun and stay on the job. If you have a concealed handgun license and an officer stops you, determines that you're intoxicated, not .08, not .07, not 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, smelled alcohol on your presence, then they can say that they can charge you with unlawful carrying. And so we're trying to get that removed. And I say, I hammered them. I hit DPS up last week on the news because they're taking a long time to process, applications and stuff like that. So I tried to make it sexy for the media. Try to make it sexy for them, and hammer them, hit them hard. Do you know that when I hit them so hard on a Thursday, by Monday they gave me what we were looking for on Monday? So hit them in the media.
Thank you. Mr. Rowland, do you have a question?
Yes.
I'm so sorry I didn't see that earlier.
John Rowland, Constitution.org. What place in your agendas do you have for holding individual officials accountable by penetrating official immunity and doing such things as opening grand juries to direct complaints from citizens?
Is the question clear to the panel?
Well, I've actually had a lot of people contact me about doing the grand jury method for the taxpayer-funded lobbying and some other things that we've caught TxDOT doing. Literally, I have such a long list of infractions of laws that this agency has broken that I could be in court every day of the week and still not litigate all of it. That's how corrupt our highway department is. And it's hard to get the attorneys and, get everything together to be able to even get a case off the ground, much less multiple cases. But that is something that's available to us, apparently. And I'm trying to understand it better before I just march into court and do it. But apparently we can go in as citizens and go before a grand jury with evidence. And if they find that there's enough to indict, then that gets you going. So it's possible to do it yourself, but pro se is pretty hard. And anyway, we're working on it, but I don't know if anyone else is.
Thank you. Is anyone else? All right. That's fine because we're in a hurry. So last question. Oh, geez. I think you had your hand up earlier, so I'm going to go with David Ring.
David Ring, I'm a nobody. My question is for Terri. Now, this is for purely selfish reasons, but I think the problem with our society is that we're all too obedient. Yeah. You're talking about the tollway. My thing is this: I've got a friend in Dallas that owes like $17,000. Nothing's really happened to him yet. Right. Now, my thing is this right here. I've got one of those toll tags on my car. Okay. What are they going to do to me if I take it off? Because I'm ready today to go out there and take it off. I mean, that's part of my monthly income. Collection. What can they do to us so that we can all, as a group right now, stop paying for this? So what can they do now? If they can arrest me,
David, I think the question is clear.
Yes, one of the things, it's a process. So first they'll send you a bill because they'll take a picture of your license plate. Don't we all love that, right? It's big daddy government out of control with these tollways. Then once you fail to pay within it's usually just 10 days is all you've got before they'll start adding heaps of fines and fees. Most of the time, like a person who owes $17,000 probably only owes a couple $100 in tolls. The rest is all fines and fees. Okay, well, we find that a lot in Austin. I get calls from people all over the state about toll collection problems. So anyway, then they'll escalate that. Once you have a certain number of tolls unpaid, there are actually several bills right now in the legislature for the North Texas Tollway Authority to get the same authority that the Harris County Toll Authority and the RMAs want the same authority. TxDOT wants the same authority. They want to have their own court system. So they become the judge, trial, jury, and they're the foxes guarding the hen house. So you basically don't have any due process, and they're doing it this way on purpose. Then, if you fail to show up in court on your court date on these, that's how they nail you. That's how you can be thrown in jail for failure to pay your toll fines, is if you fail to show up in court. And one time, well, it's kind of been remedied now, but for a while, TxDOT was sending toll bills to the address on the vehicle's title, not the most current address, which is on your vehicle registration. So people wouldn't even get their first notice until they were already in collections. And then they'd have hundreds, if not thousands of dollars in fines tacked on top of that. So it's a really hot issue. We would love it if you could get on our TURF email list so that when these bills come up for a hearing, you guys can make phone calls and say, you guys are not going to have your own court system and be your own judge and jury against the people of this state when it comes to our right to travel, because they're going to take that away by just having you be a toll violator. And by the way, a lot of those are erroneous. Now, your friend might be doing it on purpose, but a lot of them are erroneous bills, and we actually have people, my pastor is one of them, who got a bill from the Tyler Tollway Authority and has never been to Tyler in 20 years. And they told him if he didn't pay up in 10 days, he was going to start having all these consequences. And he's like, okay, so I'm guilty till I prove myself innocent. I never was on your tollway. And they had this photo that looked like his make and model of car. And basically they stuck his license plate on it. And he's never been there. So how do you prove that you've never been there when they've got a picture of what's supposed to be you on their tollway? So there's just a lot of problems with this electronic tolling.
Well, wait, it sounds like maybe you all should talk afterward. I am going to bring Pat Dixon, our chair, up right now, but first I'd like to have a big hand for our panel. Thank you, guys.
And I want to thank Caroline Gorman for moderating. Thank you very much. And Heather Fazio put this thing together. Thank you, Heather. This is the third one of these forums we've done. I think this thing is working. I really think that these opportunities are very valuable. I think you appreciate it. We want to continue to do this. The next one we're going to hopefully do sometime in June. We do need your support. I'm going to ask if you will help defray the cost. We made an investment in getting the room and putting this thing together today. On your chairs is a form that we do have to comply with. The Texas Ethics Commission makes us do this, but if you would make a donation to help defray the cost, then we can continue to do these things. You would just fill this out, and you can put Federal Reserve notes in there or a check, or fill out with a credit card, and you can give it to Caroline or Heather or myself, and we will thank you for your support and hopefully continue to bring these kind of forums together. Thank you very much for being here.